those who would trade our freedom told us they have a utopian solution, a peace without victory. They call their policy accommodation. And they say if we'll only avoid any direct confrontation with the enemy, he'll forget his evil ways and learn to love us.
These aren't theoretical, they have actually happened. And imagine if any of the severity of these events had been ramped up just a couple degrees on the dial, or if several of them happened within close proximity to one another, and the second and third order of effects that this domino effect would have on society at large. At the end of the day, just need to ask you one question. Are you prepared for what will be when the world changes? Team, welcome to the channel. As always, I'm stoked and pumped up to see it. Today we're going to be talking about Homestead Defense. And as we keep moving through this conversation, I want to remind you two things. One, look down in the description below. There's going to be a link over to download a free PDF of the remaining principles that we will not cover here in this one. We're going to talk about 10. There's a lot more than that, and that free PDF download is there for you. And the second thing is to remember that ultimately, man, the world will change, right? The world is going to change. It could change for a short period of time. It could change for a long period of time. How that happens remains to be seen. But are you ready for what will be? So we're going to be looking at about 10 individual principles that I want to bring to your attention off of this PDF. And again, looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your comments down below about what we can all do to secure our homestead. Now, I grew up in a time and a place where we didn't use words like homestead. We use words like ranch, farm, life, right? It's kind of become a cliche thing, and I don't mean that here. I just mean like your property, right? Whether you live in a rural environment or whether you live in a suburban environment or whether you live in a urban environment. What can we all do to protect our property and ensure our own liberty? The first one we're going to look at some priorities of work, and the very first principle I want to talk to you about is positioning our weapons and equipment. That's how it's phrased in the military. Almost all of these principles are directly pulled from my experience in the military, but I want to give them a non-military approach, if you will. So how do we position ourselves? I'm in a unique place. I'm going to give you some specific examples as we talk about these principles. I'm in a unique place in my life where I have my house, I have a separated garage, and I have a shop. I never had this before in my entire life. I'm extremely grateful and blessed beyond measure as I can now put a greater distance of my assets between one place to another, right? Does that make sense? If, for example, my house burns to the ground, all of the assets in my garage or my shop are intact, and vice versa. If something happens to my shop, everything in the other two buildings is protected. Now, maybe you don't have that. Again, I didn't have this growing up. I didn't have this for my entire marriage until a year ago. I lived in the one single wide trailers and the small duplexes and on military housing, where the only degree of separation I could get with my assets was from one side of the house to the other. But if that's all you can do, that's what you need to do. Because it's the principle in this that if something happens to part of our property or to part of our homestead, part of our house, then the rest of it is safe and secure. The next thing I want to talk about is some different base activities. And the first one is having a withdrawal plan. Man, I've heard it far too many times from far too many people that if whatever happens, this is just going to be my Alamo and I'm going to make my last stand. I would just submit to you to rethink and retool this if this is your perspective. And unless you don't have anybody, any community at all, you don't have any friends, you don't have any family, you have nobody who relies upon you. If that's you, then maybe this works out, right? Because ultimately it's kind of a self-centered approach. For most of us, and for most of the scenarios that we could maybe throw up on a whiteboard, we have some type of a withdrawal plan, right? If there's a raging wildfire here, I'm going to have a withdrawal plan. if there's flooding, all right, for all the big natural events, we have some type of a withdrawal plan. But when it comes to man-made events, we say, well, I don't need that anymore. And it's hard to do. It's hard to consider, because if you had to withdraw permanently, you have to think about how you're going to transport your stuff. Now, if you had good separation, maybe you already have some things that are laid out and ready to go, or easily ready to go, as opposed to just having a simple go bag, right? Like lots of dudes had little go bags. What's the next step? Get bigger, enlarge your thinking, and push out to that 40,000 foot view, right? Have withdrawal plans. And like literally get a whiteboard, write down on a piece of paper all of the events that could force you or be that triggering event to have to move. Of course, it's probably easier to start off with those natural disasters. But what is that triggering point of, if there is a fire, at what stage do I leave? Because far too many times we've seen in history that people have waited too long to get out. Don't let that happen to you or to yours. Next little group here is kind of grouped together because, again, these are military principles, but we are not the military. We do not have a huge logistical supply chain in order for us to be able to sustain operations. Teaming on the note of defense, I want to let you know the SHTF Field Manual goes into a deep dive into these types of scenarios and all of the principles, giving actionable things that we can do and put into practice right now before it's too late. Look down in the link in the description below. You can find this on Amazon. You can also find signed copies on my website. Appreciate you guys. So I need to think about things like hygiene and sanitation, all the icky crap that nobody, quite literally, that nobody wants to think or talk about. But how are you going to handle sanitation if you go to flush your toilet and nothing can go anywhere? Because things are backed up. How are you going to handle cleaning if you lose power for a long period of time, or whatever it is, right? Sanitation and hygiene are huge. And the ability to produce legitimately clean water, enough to do some first aid with, needs to be a priority. How to handle our human waste needs to be a priority in what we think about, and how this all fits into our plan. And directly related to this is our food and water supply, right? Again, we don't have huge amounts of trucks coming in. Nobody's dropping in freaking anything by helicopter or aircraft to us. What we have is what we got. So again, going back to having some disbursement in the placement of my equipment, my supplies, being methodical, whatever, being sensible about this, having a deliberate plan and how I place everything is huge, man. It's critical. And so as we move on, when it comes to our defensive characteristics, there are several, but the biggest ones I want us to think about are directly related, and that's disruption and mass of concentration. These are kind of two directly related and sometimes opposing points of view, if you will. How can I cause disruption? And where do I need to focus my mass concentration of my lines of effort? I can begin to know and understand this if I go and I analyze my terrain. For example, if I know what the most likely avenues of approach are, then I can have some mass concentration. For example, here where I live, off to my right, your left, there are tens of thousands of acres of forest, right? Nobody in their right mind is coming to my location through that forest. The most likely avenue of approach is by road, right? This is going to be the same true for vagrants, for the common thieves and criminals, for raiders in times of distress or emergency, as well as for EMS, right? As well as for if, the government gets a little bit nefarious in some of their operations, right? If they start moving up and down, they're not going to be moving through areas that they cannot supply and sustain their operations. They're going to be using the roads. Everybody's going to be using the roads. It's a It's a natural line of drift, if you will. And I need to be aware of these things as it relates to defense, because I need to know where to focus my energy. Need to know where I need to focus these cameras, right? Or whatever it is, these tools that I'm using. If you look on the second page, you'll see a plethora of things that we can add into our kit bag for specific instruments as it relates to defense. And if you have some ones that are not listed, man, leave an item, leave a description, leave a narrative of how you were able to use that. So I need to think about these avenues of approach, and I also need to think about what's key terrain. And again, we need to zoom out from the 1 meter view to the 40,000 feet view when it comes to key terrain. What are these natural and man-made pieces of terrain that are important to me and that are important to whoever them is, right? Could be these roads, could be streams, could be hilltops, could be buildings, could be water towers, could be things that are quite possibly things that I need to get to, depending on the scenario and the environment. Where are the police stations? Where are all of the EMS and the firehouses, both manned and volunteer? Where are the community centers? Where can I pull water from? We probably know where all the grocery stores, but where are the other clinics that are in the area? Things that can do the life-sustaining things that I may not be able to do, or that I may need support with. These are going to be important for them. They're going to be important for us. As I look at the way my streets are laid out and roads and the highways, where are places that I could consider that law enforcement may set up roadblocks? We saw this after Hurricane Helene. State troopers giving people a hard time and or not letting people get off of highways because they didn't want the tourists or whatever it is that you think that they were doing, right? Where are these roadblocks going to happen? And what is my knowledge of how the terrain is lined up in order to be able to work around them? Very important things to be able to work through. Last but not least, we have some operational variables we're going to consider too. One is our enemy, whoever they is, all right, and our terrain. We've kind of talked about terrain a little bit, but what we need to know and understand is how all of this, from that 40,000 feet view all the way down into the interior, right, the local view, how can I use this knowledge to defend my house, my property, my homestead, my loved ones? I need to know and understand how all of these natural and man-made features work. You know, a lot of this keeps coming back down to terrain, doesn't it? And we love to say, well, situation dictates that your area is not the same as my area. And these are true statements. But if the same common denominator is terrain, natural and man-made, we should invest much more time in really getting to know and understand the principles of being able to have freedom of maneuver and to support and sustain our own operations. This is one of the primary reasons why I have had an immense focus on navigation. But the principles are the same whether we're talking about in a wooded environment or in an urban or rural environment. Getting about requires the same principles. If you go about things just blindly, you're probably setting yourself up for failure. But when it comes to our defense and these terrain, how is it going to impact our operations? If this road that is my most likely avenue of approach, if it gets shut down for some reason, or if I intentionally shut the road down on one side, how is that going to impact my operations? What is there ever a scenario where I may have to push up through the woods to get to the other side, to get to the other road? To push up through the woods, to get to the other side, to get to the other road, and my neighbors who are on the other side of the ridge. It's possible, but if I don't plan for it, again, I'm setting myself up, right? And when we look at our individual terrain of whether you have 1 acre, 2 acres, 40 acres, 100 acres, how is all of this shaped, and what can I use to shape movement once somebody begins to enter onto my property? I want to be able to funnel them to move into specific areas so that I can control. I need to be able to dictate how somebody approaches me. Does that make sense? You can't let somebody else choose the time and the place. They may have chosen the larger view, but once they begin to come in, you have to be able to take over. And we can do this through a lot of ways you can find on page 2 of that PDF. Last one is the enemy, man. Who is this big they? And depending on the situation, the they may be different. They could be the same people with different motives or equipment. Who knows? But I need to know and understand what the strengths of this adversary is. I need to know what their most likely actions are going to be. I need to be able to anticipate what they're going to do. If I don't work through all of this, again, if I just wait for the action to start and then have a plan, I can't properly respond. Team, I'm looking forward to hearing your thoughts and your comments down below about defending our house in principle, in things that we can do in practice, and in actuality, things that we can go out and rehearse so that we can make sure that we can protect ourselves, our loved ones, and that which is in our charge. Team, I appreciate you guys. Until then, you stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked.
Team, if you want to master your craft and develop your tactical virtue, make sure you subscribe to the channel and click that notification bell so that you can stay up to date with future content. Consider becoming a channel member. It's going to give you exclusive access to content not available to anybody else. I appreciate you guys. Until then, you stay out there, you keep grinding, and you stay stoked.
We know you're out there! Come to my voice!